It's about 1:15, so I want to honor time. I like to start on time. I like to make sure I finish, when it's the end. So just want to fully honor the real fact that you all have just eaten lunch. It's the afternoon. If you're not from Colorado, then maybe the elevation may be also additionally causing some little sleepiness or whatever. So also the fact of the matter is that I've been on Zoom for a lot of time the past couple of years doing presentations, starting to do in-person trainings, which I love, but my background is as a teacher and I moved around the classroom a lot and I have to stay kind of in a general space because we are also doing this virtually. So you all just let me know if I am suddenly walking right in front where I can no longer see or I start moving, remind me that I have a few little spaces that I can sort of navigate during this session. So I just want to thank everyone so much for attending and really excited to share with you about the development of a toolkit that we created to support complaints in Oregon. I'm going to keep it fairly broad because what I want everyone to see is the possibility of the partnership and collaboration that can exist anywhere. And so with that, what I'll share with you is that my name's Heather Olivier. I work for the PTI in Oregon. And like I said previously, I was a middle school and high school teacher for many years and really felt like I really understood how to navigate special education as a teacher because I sat in a lot of IEP meetings as a teacher. And at the age of 4, my son was diagnosed with autism. And in the district where I was teaching, I attended my son's transition to kindergarten meeting. And I realized, and this really dates myself, but back in the day, we used to get a CD-ROM, okay, already, right? That said IDEA on it as a teacher that we would then put, and that's how we would learn. So I felt like I understood it as a teacher. But that transition to kindergarten meeting that I attended for my son was a very different experience. And at that point, what I realized is that I really didn't truly understand. And it was at that point that started my journey to be able to say, what does this look like? And how might parents, first of all, participate in shared learning and engage in the process. And that is really where I started sort of my transition of being able to utilize my skills as a teacher and my experience as a parent in working with the PTI and supporting families and working with community partners. And so full disclosure, we're really fortunate as a PTI in Oregon. So I feel like I foundationally have to say we have a really good relationship with the Oregon Department of Education. And that has been really foundational to sort of this direction that we took with our partnership. So before we get started, I just want to ask you, when I say the word complaint, what are some of the words that come to mind? So take a minute, if you could, with the people at your table and just share out what are some of those words that come up when you hear the word complaint. So go ahead and wrap up your last thought. So what I'd like to ask is that we have people that are joining us virtually as well. So those of you brave souls who love to have a microphone, it's not karaoke, sorry, but that'd like to share maybe what are some of those words that came up as you were thinking about that.
Opportunities for improvement.
Opportunity for improvement.
Unheard.
Unheard. Anyone else want to share?
I'll say confusing. So even as a professional and I was searching for a university class I was teaching and trying to figure out the process is confusing. I'm sure it's confusing for
Yeah.
Investigation.
Investigation. Anyone else?
Consuming.
I am consuming. I can tell by that snicker that many of us felt that one, right? Yeah. So I want to share a little bit about how we even landed as an organization at looking at state complaints. Right? Like why? Why did we start there? And so just to give you a little bit of background, if you have not had a chance to look at Cadre's website, where they actually can show every single state. And that's not gonna work. So let's do this. I just want you to take a look, because this is one of the first places that we looked. We thought, I think there's something going on around complaints. Where should we go to find out what our current situation looks like? And so this is where we went. And Cadre does a fabulous job. And then for your state, we'll break it out specifically for your state. But you see where Oregon is there? Here we have, oh, Oregon right there, okay? What assumptions might you make about what is occurring in Oregon? Okay, so for the people, because I think they can't hear it unless we use this. So,
my assumption would be families don't know they can file complaints.
families don't know they can file complaint. Someone else have a different thought when they see where Oregon is live. Maybe not fair because we see from Oregon. No, I'm joking.
Well, I was gonna say erroneously, some people might assume we don't have any problems.
Some people might believe that there's not problems. I actually was just sitting in a meeting 2 weeks ago where that was said when we were looking at this.
I see the deviation. It's not the biggest one, so I think it's probably happening.
Because there's a high, so you can see the deviation on it. Yeah.
Maybe Oregon has a really strong monitoring process that alleviates the need to file.
Maybe so, right? So when we began looking at this was actually one of the first places that we looked. Now, full disclosure, I'm on the dispute resolution committee, so I had an idea already around some of this process when we started it. What we kind of started hearing was, well, our complaints are low, so there's not really families are okay with what was occurring. And I don't remember what presentation I was in, but somebody said, I think it was the last one, they were talking about, they wished that people would call to say, hey, just wanted to tell you, like this district is doing an amazing job, right? Likewise, for a PTI, families don't call us to say, just wanted to share with you this amazing district, right? They're calling us because there is some sort of concern, right? There's something that's not happening. Frequently, it's communication, right, between school teams. And so when we looked at this and we looked at our own internal data, we realized there was sort of a disconnect. Not only that, but when families would call us, they would say things like, I'm going to sue, which automatically is an indicator to me that you might not understand dispute resolution, right? And so it became clear to us that we needed to look a little bit more closely at what this might look like. There were a couple different, and then this is broken out just to show you what Cadre does. Now you can see that it's actually broken out, you know, a little bit more detail here. So within 2020 and 2021, 22, right? Written, signed, complaints filed. This is specifically to complaints. Do you think this number is higher right now, the same, or lower? Based on the trends that are probably happening in your states, higher, right? A little bit trending higher, for sure. So the first place we went to think about is what's the problem, right? We always think about that first as an organization. Is there a problem? What do we think is the problem? And then we're going to have to figure out how to test that or get data or find out, is that really an issue? And so as we began listening to what people talked about, which included families, which also included partners, there were three things that kind of came up that we didn't know whether they were true or not. But what people shared was, we have a small number of complaints, so things are fine. And our own sort of made us think, I'm not sure if that's the case. The second one we heard is that frequently families would submit complaints that said something like, Mrs. So-and-so is a horrible teacher and should be fired. Or, you know, this district, and nothing, like a lot were just complaints that were not tied to IDEA at all, right? Let's just call that out. That's a pretty privileged experience to know how to tie a complaint to IDEA, right? Which is what is asked as part of this process. And then the other piece was around equitable access to filing state complaints. So we actually went through the process ourselves and said, what does this look like to file a complaint? And what we realized is that finding stuff on the website was difficult. You know, it was in English and Spanish, but we asked questions like, what if somebody can't read that? Could they call? You know, we just started kind of asking some of those general questions. And then I actually attended, Cadre put on a webinar that Tawara, who did a training earlier here, did. And we went back and said, who are filing state complaints? Can we look and see, do we have data that shows who actually would be filing complaints? And the answer, which is probably the answer for most states from what I've heard, is that we don't, that data is not tracked. So those were some of the problems that we just thought, let's start there and let's see what we can discover. I'm going to continuously keep grabbing that, but I'll put it on my. So we're kind of lucky in that the Oregon Department of Education has an equity decision tool that they created for school leaders. And we like to use that tool a lot in our own process in thinking about, we think there's a problem. Now we need to figure out what's, you know, what is substantiated, what's really there, and what's maybe something that's just kind of people are just sharing. So what we did is we used the equity decision tool as we began thinking about what are assumptions and beliefs that are embedded in our decision to move forward with the complaint toolkit. Has there been any research done? When we got to this phase, we actually immediately reached out to Cadre and said, can you share with us, are there other states who maybe have created a toolkit or some way that they're supporting families in this process? And the answer was that there was not something. And then we looked at what conditions are variable. So we went through this whole, where do you see disproportionality? We went through this whole process, first identifying what is the problem and sort of then centering our work based on these guiding decision tools that we use through the Oregon Department of Education. So we started this process, I should have said this before, prior to COVID. Okay, so this was not like, oh, let's just, crank out a cool toolkit. This was something that was, we started the process quite a while ago. So what did the process look like for us? Well, we used the project planning questions to decide on our scope of work. We then began meeting with stakeholders, and I'll share with you who the stakeholders were in a second. We looked at, are there any current materials? So for example, somebody shared with us a really cool document that Oklahoma had on allegations and IDEA. And so that was like a foundational tool that we looked at. We were like, this looks kind of neat. We looked at other states and what they had done. And then we began to create a plan for what this would look like. What did our collaboration look like? Well, like I said, Cadre was one of the very first people that we reached out to. But what we said is that we wanted to make sure that this tool was collaborative, that we worked with partners, and that we looked at it from multiple perspectives. So our first partners were Cadre and the Oregon Department of Education, who was very much on board with the process. We also then looked at special education or worked with special education attorneys that for districts and with families. We partner with families to share their experience, to also have them go through the process, not to the final, but have them actually navigate it in the way the system currently looks. Our staff also participated in lots of training. We worked with school teams. So we worked with special education directors. We worked with teachers, staff, and then technical assistance partners. And I'll talk about them in a moment. But one of the things that we heard a lot from, I would say primarily community-based organizations and families, was that the way that it would currently look didn't work, and that families couldn't access it, and that needed to change. Well, I think we can probably all agree on that, but some people said the process just needs to change. And as an organization, one of the things that we believe is that there may need to be some changes to the process, but the process is what it currently looks like. And so what our role really was to come alongside the current process while working with our partners to look at how there could be changes to it, but also recognizing that our here and now was making sure that families understood the current process in the way that it looks. So we did hear people who would say, it shouldn't be tied to IDEA. Well, that's not going to happen, right? So, but how can we support families in understanding IDEA? How can we, where are the places that we can put energy towards that shared learning so that families have the opportunity to understand the process, to understand this particular dispute resolution option. Technical assistant partners refers to the last time that we wrote for the PTI, one of our big parts that were changed, two things: parent leadership and technical assistance. And the recognition was that there were amazing organizations that had built relationship within community with culturally and linguistically specific families and communities. And the reality is that how could we come alongside and build relationship with people that already had trusted relationships and partnerships within community? And so what we included was training and support around navigating special education, specifically to those community-based organizations through technical assistance. So that was another piece that was really important for this process, and you'll see why in a moment. So how do we engage stakeholders? Well, we really honestly were so open to kind of put everything out there. And the way we did that is that, as I said before, we worked with stakeholders with multiple perspectives. We did input and listening sessions, which a lot of times were in partnership with our trusted partners. We also had a shared drive content, which if you've ever, worked in a shared drive content, make sure you always have a backup somewhere, right? So that was learning opportunity for us, having so many people in there and providing perspective, and a single word, right, would just be back and forth between different groups. And then a lot of collaborative input on drafts. So that whole process included all of those stakeholders that we talked about actually participating in the creation of a document, okay? And just to be clear, it's a document, right? The toolkit is specifically a document. And there's a reason why I'm calling that out kind of specifically. So in the past, this is what our support of families had looked like. We believe very, very strongly around healthy team dynamics. We believe in supporting and equipping families to participate in meaningful parent participation. We honor the parent as an expert on their child. We believe that healthy teams working together through communication, collaboration, also recognizing conflict is not a bad thing. It's an opportunity for conversation. So we really believe that as an organization, and that at the closest level to working with the team is always the place to be. And there are times when we need to look at other options. And the way that we would talk with families is through this. We would talk about the fork in the road. You're at a choice point. You can accept, you can negotiate, and we'd like to say, is there conversation happening? That's a good place to be. Further conversation. Or, right, at the fork in the road, you might have to make the decision, or not have to, because I don't think it's a bad thing. But your dispute resolution options. And at that point, we would kind of talk about, right, dispute resolution options, and sort of send families on their way. Here's your options. You can file a complaint. Here's due process, mediation, facilitated IEPs. But really, it was kind of more like, here's your next step. Here's what that looks like. Best of luck, right? So this was a shift for us to look specifically at a complaint toolkit. It was a big shift for us. When we looked at how do we address our initial concern of complaints not being tied to IDEA, because that was a big one, right? I mean, everybody was sharing that with us. We're having to spend a lot of time in going back and talking with families about the fact that it's not tied to IDEA. And so what we did is that we used our resources to create a rough draft. We sent our draft to stakeholders. We created a toolkit, which is a physical document that is also online, and you all have access to it in English and Spanish. We will be rolling it out in other languages as well. But if you go on the Cadre site, you can find those documents on there. We also recognize through the process of creating the document that we needed to create a Word document that was accessible for readers. So we created an accessible document as part of that process as well. In fact, it changed how we do all of our flyers and documents. Everything we do first is within an accessible Word document before we move anything to any other step. We translated the toolkit into Spanish, and we had multiple partners participate in that process, because you all know just taking a document and translating into Spanish word for word does not mean that your document is conveying the actual message that you want it to. And so I can't tell you how many times we changed it or had multiple people coming together to say, no, this is not what that means, you know, and working on it. It took a lot of time. And then we applied a visual design to the final toolkit. So that toolkit in its creation of it is great, right? Because we can have a physical document that someone can utilize to walk through the process. But it's not really the end for us. Because does everyone learn through taking a PDF and reading it? No. What might be some of the barriers of only having the information provided to families in a physical document? What are some of the things you can think of that might cause issue?
I would say time.
Time. Because it's a big document. Yeah. Inability to read. Inability to read. Yep.
Inability to translate what's in your head into words that make for a good complaint.
Yeah, good point. Anyone else?
Inability to get clarification.
Yeah.
That you don't understand.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So one of the things that I like to do, and it's probably just a little bit of a teaching background for me, is that how can we look at shared learning? Like shared learning is a big piece for me. So how can families receive the information they need? So even if a family calls, I tell my support team that that's education. All pieces of the work we do are education and learning. So how can you look at different ways? We support families in a variety of different ways. So part of the toolkit, that's the first part, is the actual document. The next pieces are videos, where we would have shorter pieces, people coming and doing like scenarios or very specific examples of what that might look like. We're also doing trainings around it as well. So the toolkit is great. And it's only one part of the work that we're doing. So do you have a? Is there something I need to do? That's okay. Well, there we go. There we go. So I wanted to walk you through a little bit of the complaint toolkit that I think makes it a little bit unique. Okay. Because we spent a lot of time on internally as an organization on a bunch of things. This was our big question. How do you know if a state complaint is your next step? I'm just going to ask that of all of you. Actually, if you could just take maybe like a minute, 2 minutes to talk within your groups. How do you know if a state complaint is your next step? You could finish up your last thought. If you could wrap up your last thought. What were some of the themes that came up as you were talking? What were some of the themes that came up at your tables? To this question, how do you know if a state complaint is your next step? What were some of the themes that came up at your table?
I tied it back to the session I was in yesterday where they talked about separating your position from the interest. And that if it's something that you can't easily tie to IDEA, then you're probably better off going to mediation something else and not doing one form of state complaint. If you know you can, without a doubt, tie it to IDEA violation, then that may be the way to go. I'll believe that you still probably should do the other things first. But if for some reason you think it's so bad that you don't want to, or you believe that that's not going to happen anyway, because sometimes you just know that whoever's going to show up at that facilitated meeting or even that mediation, you might have already had this special director at the IDEA. So do I need to rehash this again? Maybe my.
Yeah, thank you. Another table? Yeah.
One of the things we talked a lot about was folks, again, not feeling heard or feeling dismissed, and they haven't really make great responses as they've been trying to work through something. Or maybe they have, but the responses haven't really been thorough or adequate, and that's where you choose. Another one I would say that I think can be a point at which it's a decision point is also if families believe that what they're seeing is something that's more systematic, right?
Right.
And you choose to do that out of a principle standpoint of you want other families also to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Right, which is, I think, something that families will share a lot, you know, that I'm gonna do this because this is happening. But the reality is state complaint isn't about systemic, right? It's about what is individually occurring for your child, so. But when we're working directly with a family, and sometimes there is nothing very specific that is IDEA related, they just want to do it because they think that's going to change, even though there's nothing specifically there, but they're told that the state complaint might be the thing that changes it, but they don't have anything tied to IDEA. If that makes sense? I think a lot of times families are, you know, I'm going to do this because this is going to change the whole system. And you still have to make sure that what you're sharing is the allegation is specific and that you have IDEA, you know, that something happened. And so I think it's just another place where maybe people don't understand the process, right? Yeah. I know, sorry.
That is, seems to me, it goes back to it's sort of a dilemma that's been around for a long time. And working with parents that, and I know districts, states that may try to develop a whole, and PPI too, is try to bring it along, educate them about the process, options on it, to some degree or another. But the reality is that there are parents who go through those trainings, go through that process, no matter what, the common racial, whatever else, are going to do that. But we all inevitably run into parents who want to know everything right now. And I think that's, you know, some of the problem is that this is not a system you can sort of sit there and, you know, taking the answer to that. I mean, you can say, hey, here's your options, but that's not really educating about the process. So I just, maybe some states that have achieved this, where they, pick up minutes in preschool and work with them all. Now, their education career and the process, that's great, but certainly that hasn't been my experience with all of them. Yeah, thinking about it. You are in the process. So now I want to know that it's good. I mean, how to do that.
I think that's a great question. We started in recognition of if we can support families very early on in understanding the process, right? We started a parent leadership with the intention that those families would also be able to help other families as well. I think that's, I think it's a great question. And honestly, I appreciate an opportunity even within the past 2 days of being able to hear how other states are doing things. Because I think there's a lot to learn from each other. I know that when we originally started this, we were even just talking about parent surveys right before this. We didn't have other states that we were talking to that had something kind of similar where we could start this process. But we just firmly believe as early as possible, if we can start talking with families, and our parent leadership includes dispute resolution. Our parent leadership includes more than that, conflict and healthy team dynamics, working with your school teams as a front load to it. And then also understanding that it's not, it's not a bad place to, I'm fortunate in that my son has an amazing IEP team, but we've all learned to work collaboratively together because everyone's coming to the table with best intention. It doesn't mean that we all believe the same thing, but we've all figured out how to work together. And that's what we're trying to support families in, just having that understanding. I think knowing how to move this forward. This was a big one for us as an organization because our own staff struggled with how do I know when it's time to move beyond, have you met with your school team? Have you contacted the case manager? Right? They were themselves kind of like, how do we know when it's time to encourage families? And honestly, I feel like it's important for families to understand all of their options and understand the difference in those options. Because ultimately they're the ones who make the informed decision on the direction that they want to go. So what we did was, and this part of the document was the part that we went the most round and round. Because half of the group said, no, if somebody's at a complaint, then the toolkit should just be a complaint toolkit. And the other half was like, but what if somebody picks up the complaint toolkit and they're really not at that place yet because they don't maybe understand like what their initial concern is. So a lot of times when I talk with a family, they might not even be able to clearly share with me exactly what their concern is. They just know that something's not working and they're upset. And so the first part of that process is trying to identify, well, what is your main concern? Now, I should tell you that prior to this years ago, and we're in the process of updating it, we had created a special education toolkit that included a one-page profile for families to share with their school team, and also a parent input statement that includes what are your concerns and then what remedies would you like to suggest for the team. So identifying specific concerns have been something we've been working with families for a long time. We actually weren't really willing to remove this. section. At the end of the day, we all decided if the off chance that somebody, and not off chance, because I think it's very common, someone picks up the complaint toolkit because they believe that's their next step. The whole point of something not being tied to IDEA or not being a complaint was a big part of why we chose to do this. So this was actually really, really well received by the district lawyers and the lawyers for families. Really appreciated this first section because they said, this is what we already do with families who come to us, is that we talk about this checklist. So we created a checklist that says, I gather documentation that supports the concern I would like to address. I shared a one-page profile and a parent input statement that includes the vision for the future, what works and what doesn't work. I attempted to participate in the special education process. So what we felt is that if people went through this part first, either independently or guided, that they would be better prepared to understand what they might need for that next section. And then another part that I find really interesting when I work with families is that what would it take to address the concern and what do you want the district to do? Frequently, families haven't thought about that. They haven't really thought about what am I asking for? I know I'm just upset, right? I know I'm angry. I know that the communication with the team is broken down, but they don't know exactly what they would want. I did have a parent to say to me once, I just want them to apologize. That I've heard that from more than one parent. But they hadn't really thought about what am I looking for, how this would look differently. And so this is a piece that we felt it was an important piece to have included in there. And a lot of our partners have actually just taken this section because we wanted to front load this first so that families would then determine, are they ready for the next step?
I think answering that question is harder than tying into IDA because so many parents don't even know what's available to know what they want.
Right.
They just know they want something more, but
Right.
they don't, they just really don't know what it is that's available.
Yeah.
To tie that.
I'm not sure that I've, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't think I've ever worked with a family that already had this, like they already knew exactly what that would look like.
We were talking about in one of the advanced mediation things that I've did this week. Also the fact that the other thing you'll get with that question is a laundry list.
Right.
I want these 12 things. I said, okay, well, if you're gonna go to mediation first, or because this would even be a good media prep for thinking through some of those other things. You know, if you're gonna go and negotiate, whether it's through a state complaint or mediation, if you got 6 things on your list, you got to prioritize.
Right.
And you got to be ready to say, okay, I might be willing to give up these 2 if I could get these 3. Because families don't know that negotiation tactic that goes into the mediation piece. But I think that's also important to give the state complaint officer. Like if I want these things, and these are the most important ones.
Right. That's a great point. I think that would be helpful for families to know.
Piggyback on what you said, the calls that we get from a lot of times from parents is that it's sort of couched as, I want speech 3 days a week. And we sort of ask them about that, or why, or whatever else. Usually is all that's code for my kid's not doing very well. And it's not getting addressed. And so that's kind of where there's a starting point there. And that then you can sort of say, steer them to say, okay, look at the data. Say on this, sometimes this is going out the data sort of say, then it becomes sort of like, well, trouble. So, it's kind of, you know, from there. Anyway, most of the 90 to 95% of the things we hear from parents are code.
100%. And what parent wouldn't, you know, would want to address that or figure out what that looks like? And I think to the point you made, really peeling back those layers, right? To what is at the core, what's the root of your concern? What would you like to see different as really a starting place? And then asking all those questions. What will that look like? When will that happen? Who's going to be doing that? You know, all of those questions around, you know, it might be that somebody was on a social media platform where a parent said, you know, every kid should get this, and you suddenly believe that that's what your child should have. But if we really peel back the layers and really think individually around what a child needs, right? What is your concern? My concern is my child's not doing well in school. Well, let's look at what's going on and really kind of peeling back and figuring out the situation. But I do find that that is an area that's frequently something that families aren't thinking about. And sometimes will be the place where if they're going to file a complaint because they see they have to tie it to IDEA, and then they also have to say what they would want to address it, that it's kind of like, never mind, because maybe they haven't really thought the process through. So we thought this worksheet initially might be something that would be helpful. Also recognizing that this section here around special education, like IDEA, requires learning and education, right? That list doesn't mean that somebody's going to read it and suddenly go, oh yeah, okay, it must be fake, right? Because you would have to know what that means. And so we actually have a resource document that we reference here that has examples of allegations and supporting facts, examples of a written complaint that can help with completing this activity that we reference. And so this one we went back and forth on, but I'm really glad that we included it. It's actually been the place that most partners have really said, this is where this has really helped. And in fact, our staff, this is the process that they've gone through a lot of times in working with families, but having this very specific here as they've begun working with families in determining whether that's the next step, this has really clarified for them, because it's a step that they can go through in helping families figure out. I'm going to give you a little bit of guess what has happened. Most of the families who have come in and talked about that they wanted to file a complaint after having gone through it have recognized that maybe they haven't talked with a special education director, or that they didn't realize that facilitated IEP was an option, or mediation. And so for most of the families, it actually has just served as an opportunity to say, what are some other things that we might need to know that could help? What is currently occurring with the team? Would you want to? We don't at this point. This was the first one we were kind of asked to start with. And so then what we did, and just to show you as an example, but you all have it on there, we actually went step by step through filing the complaint. We did one, and then actually on the document for Oregon, one, so that they could match up exactly. A lot of times people believe that they could file a complaint anonymously. So just addressing some of those main questions throughout the entire document. We went through the process of doing that. And I'm just showing you, sort of highlighting a few places. And then we did examples of allegations and supporting facts, which is very brief, but we just wanted people to get the idea, right? That you have your allegation, your violation, your supporting facts, and your proposed solution. We wanted them to see examples of what that might look like and also to be pretty specific. And then we also included a glossary of terms. Now, here's what I'll tell you. Readability level. What happens with readability level the minute that you are utilizing words like compensatory services? It automatically goes up, right? So what we worked really hard at saying, and somebody said to us at some point, well, just don't put those words in there. Just, you know, put it in family-friendly language. I believe that families can understand. If we identify and define and teach the very specific words that they need to understand, right? I don't want them to enter a meeting and not understand compensatory services if that's something that's going to be discussed in the meeting. But how can I use the definitions? And we worked really, really hard on the definitions to work on that readability level for the definition. And so that really is sort of the core of just an overview of the toolkit, which you all have examples of. Yeah. Get my good stuff.
So when looking at the document,
Yes.
I will have a guide. What it is that they like want to convey. Have you found that, so have you found that if someone's completing that, I'll try to word this the best way I can, trying to get my thought across, where someone might be filling that out, but mediation isn't mentioned for several pages in.
Yeah.
But really you could request mediation, you could mitigate an actual written state complaint by allowing, you know what I mean, a mediation
front loading it.
conversation to have first.
Yeah.
Where is the right place for it? I don't know, but have you ever found with using that document that mediation still occurs prior to an actual state complaint or in the conjunction with, or, you know?
I really appreciate that question because was a main, one of the main topics that we discussed was, could we front load some of those other pieces there? And so just to kind of let you know, it's the difference between how we are utilizing the toolkit. So what I mean by that is that how we worked with our staff specifically around how they might be supporting a family in utilizing this would actually front load that conversation at the time that they start that initial worksheet. But guess what? That's not going to happen if somebody just pulls the toolkit off the website, right? So one of the other pieces that we've talked about is how do we, as we are doing videos and doing our training, how do we front load that information? I don't know that we can, with the current format, I don't know that we can, we're still going to have somebody take it who's going to probably misinterpret parts of it, or, you know, and that at one point we were like, well, we're just not going to put it out there. We're just going to only give it to families that specifically request it, and then we're going to guide it. That's not reasonable. We can't do that. So then we looked at what are other ways that we might do that process. So the next piece was around equitable access to filing complaints. And our question we asked ourselves is, how do we ensure that filing a state complaint or the dispute resolution option is equitable? Had great conversation with ODE around the Oregon Department of Education around this question. As I said to you before, when I asked, do we know demographics of who's filing complaints? I've got an idea of who's filing complaints. But do we know? And the reality is that's not data that's tracked. Could we track back from the student that's named in it? Yes. Is that something that's done? I know that I asked at the cadre community of learning group, And none of the other states that were PTIs knew of whether or not their state was doing that. But what we recognized is in developing this, we were not developing this with the intention of families who had the ability to hire, a lawyer, or who were able to hire someone to help them with this process, or maybe who had the ability to navigate the process. That's not the intention of this, of who we created this for. And so what we realized is that we had to think about what we could do as an organization, that there were changes that were happening to the process that are currently happening, that were not, that were the SEA. But what could we do? And so that's where we began looking at our planning for adult learning by translating it into multiple languages and making sure that we use transcreation as part of that process. Also as part of the process of our training. So we're going to do our first training in Spanish in the next couple of weeks. Our bilingual program specialist took the toolkit. Now, here's the feedback we've received about the toolkit. For families that are fearful to even send a message or talk to their teachers about their concerns, best intentions of creating a toolkit, in Spanish, but the reality is, how comfortable will a family feel filing a complaint? And so our bilingual program specialist has actually been working, doing some transcreation specifically around the toolkit that includes backing up conversations with families around meaningful parent participation, engaging with your school teams, and so not just as a solo training that is specifically around complaints, but also introducing it. And so that part has been pretty amazing work that is being done. We also worked on training staff on supporting families and community partners, so our technical assistants. So partners recognizing that they could file on behalf, that's not something that partners, community-based organizations knew. So we've been providing technical support for them to understand this process so that they can also work with families that they have trusted relationships with in understanding what this process looks like. And then, to be honest, a lot of training for our staff. Our staff were really nervous, very, very nervous. They were like, UPL. They were very, very nervous about actually working directly with a family. The reality is that what I want them to do is meet a family where they are, always, presuming competence. And then how can you come alongside and support a family in whatever level that they might need in order to engage and participate? And so that they were nervous about it. And we actually did a lot of trainings where we did scenarios and worked on it. And then they said, oh, this is exactly like how we would support a family for any time that they contacted us. Meeting them where they are, presuming competence, coming alongside where they need support. And so that's been really powerful for our staff to understand how to help or support someone when they are at this next step. We're going to do accessing information in multiple formats, videos and trainings, which we're in the process of creating. Are there any other ways that you, I'd love to sort of hear from you all. Are there any other ways that you think would be helpful for us to participate in sort of adult learning or sharing out that maybe we haven't thought of? Love to hear from you all. Maybe ways that you're engaging with communities or families that you're finding has been really successful.
I don't know how well this would work with this situation, but we've started something where, we have had posters made. And it's basically just to contact us if you have concerns about your child. And not education, not for anything. And there's a, little scan thing on, what do we call it, a little square thing, you can pull it on up to it and you can get to our, our website and submit a request. I could see maybe if you had things like that and centers with parents going that way, or, libraries. We have a concern about the child, not want to learn more about complaints.
They can scan it using like a QR code or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a great idea. Capacity.
Sort of reminds me of, the MTSS model. Where, what we, different is that you have different tiers about interventions for kids, and it seems like it applies to adults. That, for, here's a basic level, what most, if not all, parents need that information. Then there's another tier as far as a little more assistance, maybe a little more assistance than just what you got.
Yeah.
There, and then there's the three, how many tiers you have, but the final tier is hand over hand assistance and helping them write it. That's what they need. The other thing is just follow up with the new saying that I am way behind the curve with this, but I keep hearing about what really is cutting edge about things in social and how to use social media.
Yeah.
And how to really use that connects the parents and that way. I wouldn't have the first thing how to do that. But what I know it's I've been in a similar situation, where different groups, whether, whatever we're dealing with, social media can be really big tool in that way. It's just, so I don't know. However, the other thing I'll say about social media is that be careful with that because of that can turn to be ugly, and that's not necessarily help the situation.
Yeah, we have this really great communication team that is recently formed. That wants to do all things TikTok. Corey is the one who wants to. And I think it's kind of a fine balance because it can be great. And also you wouldn't want someone to capture like a snippet that doesn't give like the full, yeah, so they're.
Well, so I was at the national conference last week, where the parent training and information centers and family voices. And I did go to a session where they were talking about addressing reaching younger audiences using TikTok, but I was even thinking about what the one woman showed was just snippets. So like a little piece of, might I be ready to file a complaint? And then have I, and she didn't use any words. She did everything with signs. And then the signs could be translated into different languages. So like your little bulleted list could have been that could be a TikTok to say, might I be ready? And then at the end, like, if you've checked all these boxes or you need to know more about these boxes, call us. Like I could see that to be a good short one. I've been trying to think creatively. I am not a TikTok.
Are you looking for a new job?
No. Somehow I think if I am, my parent center would want to use me.
I feel like you just laid out the plan right there. I love that. I love that. Right. I love that so much. And that's really, that was the important part for us is how can we make sure that we are looking at different ways of engaging with families, that we're sharing out information. Not everybody learns the same way. And in recognition that it was a change for us to even as an organization to say, there might be other ways that families want to learn information, besides talking on the phone. Right? And so as we looked at building up a resource library on the website, I know that for me, I personally don't like to talk on the phone a lot. So if I can go somewhere and I can find the information, even sometimes first, and then I have an opportunity to reach out, that's a big piece. So that's a lot of the things that we were thinking about as we were looking at what this might look like. What we didn't want is a document to be sort of, here it is, right? And that's it. But how can people access it in a variety of different ways? And so that's been a big part. And the last part I didn't really talk a lot about, but the training to community-based partners through our technical assistance. So one of the pieces that we did was we took a lot of the trainings that we did for staff, which already kind of have grounding, but a lot of active engagement as part of the process. So them actually, going through the opportunities to say, like a scenario of a family calling or something like that, doing some role play around how you might support a family. And so that's one of the things that we looked at in terms of our training to community-based partners, that we said, what would it look like, right? So me coming in to do a training doesn't mean that it's going to meet the needs of the organization that we're working directly with. So sharing with them the information, but saying, what would this look like for you? What information would you need in order to support your families? And then all of our training, our technical assistance isn't just us coming in and doing sort of a canned training, but it's working directly with the partners to say, what would this look like? Does it look like training for your staff directly, right? Does it look like, do you want us to do a formal training? Do you want it to be informal, where maybe we just have the toolkit and we walk through it so we can show you the different parts? When you are working with your communities, what's the way that they, want information? And so that's how we kind of look specifically at this piece right here, particularly when we're working with communities that don't feel comfortable with this process. Not only don't feel comfortable, but are fearful and are scared of this process. And so that's been a big piece of our learning. And at first, what we did is we had our staff specifically do it as pilot. So they would work directly with a family. And then we figured out like what's working, where are the rub areas, what parts are not working of this process. And what we found, to be honest, is that most people that went through the worksheet, one of two things: either they had some additional steps to do, like they weren't in that place, they chose to look at some other options, and they had the information or they had the information from those initial steps to move on to moving forward with filing the complaint. So so far that's been our experience. We're really new in this phase. I will say this, just as a side note, when this all was finalized and we started to roll it out was in the middle of a pandemic. So where we had lots of enthusiastic support previously, the timing was, just based on the time frame. So what was really helpful was that our partners who had participated in the beginning of it, who felt a little bit nervous about the timing of when it came out, had a chance to look at it. And when our partners saw it, they saw it as collaborative, right? When they just heard complaint toolkit, that sounded a little bit like, yikes. But when they had a chance to look at it, there was the realization and the way that we were providing support around it, that it truly is an opportunity for collaboration and partnership and supporting families in understanding the process. So I already talked a little bit about, actually, I talked mostly about this, where we are now. And I would say that I still get, to this day, just because I think, I still will have staff that, and I guess I should mention this. If there is a parent that needs fairly significant support, like you talked about, that hand over hand, like very, very direct support, then that actually comes, we have a whole process internally as an organization that would actually come to me in conversation, so that the family would, because that's really kind of a next step up level in supporting a family. And so we would then work closely with my team in order to make sure the family is supported in that process. So they're still a little bit nervous about that as we're kind of rolling it out and like, is this one, and so that's the process we're still in right now. And then also the feedback that we're getting from families. So that part is a really powerful part of this whole process, is that they're still continuously providing some feedback. And then, like I said, that technical assistance is we're still in that early stages of that, where we have started to meet with partners. And so with that, I'd love to just open it up to any questions. The first thing I want to ask you is, are there any pieces of what you've seen around I feel like I wanted to keep it super broad so that you all could see sort of the implications around how it might be used within your own states, but are there pieces of what I've shared with you about this process that you think might work, or something you might consider with your partners that you work with, or within your own way that you might do the work that you currently do? So what are there specific parts that or is there a piece?
Have a weak accountability system, and the special ed director tells you, well, nobody's complaining, so we must be doing fine. Then I took that as almost a challenge, like, well, then I got to get people complaining, because she doesn't consider facilitated IEPs or mediation free relief the same thing as complaints. So they look at complaints for accountability. If the states, very few schools even have to send in anything, and most of them do self-reporting. So they don't, for us to go out someplace like we did years ago, almost never happens. So I feel like that, even though we see the same thing over and over again, places that we know problematic, if it doesn't rise to a complaint, then to her, it's not a complaint. So I see us replicating this whole thing to some degree. Now, we probably are going to have to really go down deeper into, some really good examples and help them understand, what is and what isn't and how to do it. We don't have the capacity to write complaints with people, nor do I really want to do that.
Yeah.
But to me, that we've been called out that if you think this is really a problem, then you need to complain about it, because it's not coming up on my radar, so it's not happening anymore. So I'm on this mission now that I was really excited to see this session, because I thought, oh, that's what I need to go to, because they're going to tell me how to get this ball rolling. So there's a part of me that feels like I've been challenged to how many complaints can we have, sent to the ESCOM, blow them away, because our attorney apparently isn't doing much of anything right now this day.
Well, and we heard similar language, similar like, well, everything must be fine because people aren't filing complaints. We heard the same thing. The reflection for me is not that, everything is fine, because there are, but that families don't understand the process. So when they are at that place, I just don't think dispute resolution options, that shouldn't be seen as a negative thing.
Right.
It's an opportunity for conversation. It's an opportunity for, at the time, facilitated IEPs were not happening within our state. That's very recent in Oregon. While they existed, they were not, ODE wasn't, as a part of COVID recovery services. Facilitated IEPs became something that started happening in Oregon more regularly where parents could request it. This was created before that happened. So it's actually helped for us to like support families in understanding the process, but even more than that, also explaining their options to you. Making sure.
We have lots of charter schools and a lot of them have, it's, you have to see one in writing, but there's unwritten policies that we don't participate in anything in Farm Town. So
Mhm.
if you request a facilitated IEP or mediation, it's gonna be no. So then the only thing you really can do is go up that next step. Go up and say,
Well, and I would say that has actually been at our last dispute resolution committee. Charter schools was probably the one that has increased over the past couple of years. So I'm guessing that that's probably a trend elsewhere too. Anyone else? I'm good with it.
So I got connected with your toolkit on the cadre calls because I attend those
Oh,
for
okay.
our parent training and information center.
Yeah.
And I certainly shared them with the other parent advisors. I know in our situation, one of the things that happens is we have had a lot of people say, hey, can you help us with the process? What's the process look like? We had nothing. So now we have something we can start with. And I think I was thinking, starting with where you went, and there's a piece that our, the Colorado Department of Ed is looking at in terms of having people understand some of the relationship implications of filing a state complaint. And again, that's not to discourage them, but to give them another tool to say, okay, as you go through this process, how do you think about, you're probably not going to end up with your kid at a different school. How do you maintain the relationship or do some of that restorative justice relationship building piece along the way? And that's where I could see a really nice addition to that. Like recognize that when you do this process, people are going to be people you make mad, and that's fine. Again, it's there for a reason. The process is there for a reason, but how do you come out on the other side whole or partially whole?
I love that. I love that so much. And while it's not specifically in there, I like that you just said about maybe an addendum or something that you would include, because I do think that's such an important part of the conversation, when you're working with your school teams, understanding that at the other side of the process, that's the school team most likely you're going to be working with, and just understanding all of that, right? Understanding the whole process and what it looks like and what that means. So it has shifted for us a little bit, just in terms of previously we wouldn't have been talking about facilitated IEPs. Now as an additional option, as part of the process that our teams our staff have been sharing with families, our state is also tracking data on that and looking to see, are people utilizing facilitated IEPs and are they finding them successful, and what's happening after, those. So we're in the early stages of this. Really appreciate that I've had some thoughts based on your feedback and what you've shared, because this is a working document, right? That's like an IEP, right? It's a working document that we want to learn and we want to continuously update and figure out, how we can best support great outcomes for kids. Yeah. So I think that this was the first place we started with the recognition. We thought, oh yeah, okay, this is what people are asking for, but we are looking at how would we look at this for all options. Yeah. Down the road. The process takes time, and I'm glad that we took time on it too, because I think the engagement with our stakeholders was probably the best learning that we experienced. I think we thought it was going to be like, no big deal, this will be easy, let's just, you know, and we learned a lot. Yeah. That's a great question. So we had quite a few people in districts from around the state that actually provided input and were part of the process, which I think was really helpful because people could look to, and then you probably saw on that last page, we actually have like, we asked everyone, are you okay with us including a thank you? Because we thought that was important for colleagues to see that who had been part of that process to understand. And that was important to us. Well, I haven't received anyone specifically, saying like, directly. I would imagine that there might be some people that are concerned. Yeah. Totally. Right. Yeah, for sure. Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not, and honestly, it was part of our initial process where we weighed the risks. And that was a risk. Let's be honest, right? That was a risk. And there was a lot of debate around the risks. And ultimately, what I will tell you is, while this hasn't been out very long, I wouldn't say that our data supports that the use is an increase in complaints. That's not what our data is supporting right now at this point. Now, I think what it does support is that families are utilizing mediation and facilitated IEPs and engaging with their school teams with a parent input statement, one-page profile, going back to the table to have conversation with the intention that, they may or may not down the road, move forward with a complaint, but that's not, I'll just say at this point, that's not what our data, based on the families that we supported in utilizing it, is showing. But I can't speak to down the road as it's more widely utilized. And honestly, I want families to understand their dispute resolution options, and I want them to understand how to navigate a complicated system, understanding the system. So that's really the core of my of the work, that I'm committed to doing, and understanding that like we put a lot of energy into healthy team dynamics and working with your school teams. And that really is foundationally at the start of every training that we do, is we do a lot of grounding with families around meaningful parent participation. I think that's the most important, to be honest. So, any other questions? Please feel free to reach out to me. Honestly, if you have any questions, or you want updates on how things are going, we're appreciate the opportunity also to learn from all of you too. And if you have something that you're utilizing in your state that would be a great resource for us to look at too, we are so interested in learning from each other. So thank you.